When you go and work somewhere else, it's so easy to try and compare things, good or bad, about the place and stuff like that. And who better to compare nursing in Canada and the UK than myself? Of course, I'm going to be comparing things. So, obviously adjusting to the workplace and adjusting to things is very difficult sometimes, especially when you're used to one way or you've seen one thing or the other and stuff like that. So can't help myself, guys. I've got another comparison video for you guys. So today I want to compare hours of work, I want to compare shift patterns, and I want to compare whether working full-time or part-time between Canada and the UK. If you think this is something that you're interested in, please stay tuned till the end, and don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and let's get into it. Hey guys, my name is nursenyamouch, and I'm an overseas nurse working and living in the UK. And on my channel, I provide you all sorts of nursing content from comparison videos and working here in the UK and what my experience has been like, some lifestyle changes, me being pregnant and some updates, as well as maybe, just exploring financially, how do we manage, especially as nurses, especially working in the UK, with such limited resources, such limited income. Anyways, guys, let's get started to the video that you came for, which is comparing working hours, full-time, part-time shifts. So of course, we know all around the world, nursing shortage of nurses and nursing staff is just like beyond us, It's like, what is even happening to this world? What is even happening to the nursing industry and stuff like that? And so, of course, here it is apparent, it is live and well, the short staffing and, things like that here in the UK. And I think a lot of it has to particularly play to the reason, our first point essentially. And our first point is working full-time and part-time hours, or getting full-time and part-time hours and stuff like that. And I think due to the lack of nurses and the shortage of nurses and the really high demands of the healthcare system within the NHS, and also just, the services that are needed and the demand for it, here in the UK, you find a lot of nurses are working full-time hours. And full-time hours here in the UK means 37.5 hours a week. It would look like 3 shifts a week. However, they're scattered, and that's for your first 3 weeks of the month. And then your last week of the month, you would then have to do an additional shift just to make up for all those half hours that you couldn't fully make, and then that should make up your full hours and stuff like that. So essentially, for the first 3 weeks of the month, you do 3 shifts, and then your last week of the month, you would do 4 shifts. And that's what full-time hours would look like. So here in the UK, that was such a big difference that I noticed when I first came, because they are handing you full-time cards. You get a full-time hour, you get a full-time job, you get a full-time job and stuff like that. So that was something that's just apparent. Most people work full-time. They are always recruiting for full-time and stuff like that. Of course, don't get me wrong, people do work part-time. There are people who have part-time positions. But again, most times, everybody's working full-time, and it's more of when you have special circumstances like childcare and things like that you are working part-time, because realistically you can't even afford to work full-time. I mean, you can't even afford to work part-time out here, so it just, essentially everybody works full-time, and that was quite a big difference that I did notice. In Canada, people work full-time as well. Don't get me wrong, we're not sitting on our asses, kicking our feet back and saying, no, I only want to work part-time. However, prior to COVID and prior to the nursing shortage that we've been experiencing in these last couple of years, nursing was a little bit more difficult to get a full-time position as a newly graduate student. So here in the UK, a newly graduate student would just apply for their job. Most times they would get the full-time position. Of course, not just on any ward or whatever. However, in Canada, it was when years ago and stuff like that, prior to COVID and all these, it would be, as a new graduate, you would start off in a casual position where you pick up shifts here and there. So almost like what we call bank here in the UK. or you would start off as part-time. And from there in Canada, you work your way up into building your full-time hours. So when a slot becomes available for a full-time position, then you would then apply. So when you went for a job interview and when you went to apply for a job in Canada, again, now things are different, but before you couldn't just get a full-time position as a nurse. And so lots of people did work as casual, as part-time, and they worked their way up towards the seniority of getting a full-time position. And obviously getting a full-time position also came with its perks. And some of those perks would be getting your benefits. So if you've seen my video that I'll link here, that's just talking more on the nursing benefits and the different ones that you get. So yes, working full-time also meant benefits, whereas when you work a part-time position or when you're working casually, you never actually were entitled to a lot of these benefits and such. So it was more of an incentive, incentive essentially for people to work full-time when they can get that position. The next difference that I would like to address that really bothers me, mind blows, pisses me off, and I have no control over it, can't do anything about it, but you know what, why not just rage about it, is shift patterns. And you know what, shift patterns here in the UK are sporadic. They are everywhere. They do not care what kind of shifts you are doing. And I think a lot of this has to do, again, with the whole short staffing and, you know, the demands on the nurses, the demands on the healthcare system and all the services and stuff like that. So really, I don't think they can afford to give people lovely schedules. They can afford to give people 4 or 5 days off and stuff like that. So here in the UK, I'll show you guys a picture here or here, and that's just like how your shifts would be. One day you would be on a day shift, tomorrow you are off. And then 2 days later, you're back on, or then you're on a night and stuff like that. So shifts are just not together. There's no actual pattern to how your shifts work. And it's just upsetting because your days off, that then results to your days off being sporadic as well, which just leaves you no time to actually do anything. So if I have one day off today, like yesterday I had a day off, well, what was I doing that day? Probably trying to relax for the first, hour and then getting on with the rest of my chores that I've got to do at home here, whether it's cooking, catching up on laundry, cleaning up the house. And again, I'm a single person for now with just me and my husband, but imagine having kids and having one day off and then you're back in again, I'm back in today and things like that. So that doesn't leave a lot of time to be able to do things, especially when you are working full time. Whereas in Canada, let's go fix the shifts. Again, I'm not too sure if it's all across the board, but from where I did my nursing training, typically shifts are 4 on, 4 off, maybe 5 off. And people are typically scheduled per line. So you had your set of lines, you do your set of shifts, and then you'd be off for a set amount and stuff like that. So it seemed like a lot more people were willing to do a lot more hours together. Again, they weren't always all long days. They can look like 3-day shifts and 1 night shift, 2-day shifts and 2 night shifts. And it was just kind of like that. But it will give you a little bit more of a schedule, a little bit more of harmony, and you know when you are getting off. Again, don't get me wrong, it's not everybody's shifts are like this. Some people do have scattered shifts. If you're part-time, you're full-time, you're casual. There are still scattered shifts, but for the most part, you were given in lines. Also, full-time hours in Canada were more on a 40 work hour week. So that's an extra 3 hours and 75 whatever minutes. Is that it? Yeah. Per week and stuff like that. So that was the difference. I think personally, I did enjoy the shift patterns more in Canada. Of course, it is longer and you work a little bit more days together, but I also do genuinely appreciate having a lot more of my time off together, especially prior to pregnancy. So now that I'm pregnant, I can only probably do 2 long days together, and then I need a break, especially because my pelvis is just not feeling it and all the walking around. But prior to pregnancy and stuff like that, I was always ready to go. If I knew all I had to do was work 4 days in a row and then I'm off for 4 days or 5 days, I would do that. And I was willing to do that and stuff like that. But then again, each to their own, because I know people who are just as young as me or who are the same age or whatever who can't actually do those hours. So those were the kind of like the shift differences and stuff like that. Here in the UK, I also noticed, I'm not too sure if it's a set in stone difference and stuff like that, but it just feels like in the UK, or in Canada, let's start off for say, in Canada, because they do a lot of their shift systems on a line basis, so you work a certain line, then the next group of people come in to work the certain line and stuff like that. Again, I never been in the management part, but it just seems like, you know, the full-timers always had their shifts kind of inputted first into the roster, and then whenever they needed additional people to work, this is where they would insert their casual positions and their part-time positions and stuff like that. Whereas here in the UK, I just feel like full-time workers are essentially the last to get picked, essentially the last to get their shifts put in, and we kind of get the leftover shifts that are essentially left, because as a part-timer, most part-timers have set schedules, or if they don't have set schedules, they, you know, people have set schedules and stuff like that. So essentially, it just feels like here, anybody who's part-time or who has special requests and stuff like that, their shifts all get put in, and then the rest of us then get our shifts put in, and then basically it's just everywhere, which leads to us working 1 day here, 5 days, 2 days here, and all that stuff, which is just very sporadic. So that's just how it felt for me and stuff like that. Just generally, shifts here in the UK, I just feel so drained. I feel so emotionally, physically, mentally, everything drained. And it's just, shifts here in the UK are hard. I'm not sure what shifts are back home for any of you guys. And I just can't recall being as tired as I am here in the UK than I was in Canada and stuff like that. And again, don't get me wrong, I'm no short staffing in Canada. Canadians don't come for me, because I know we're short staffed there, and I know shifts are hard there and stuff like that. But here the aging population is just, it's hella hard. So that's just my personal opinion. Of course, everybody's entitled to their own, and people have their own experiences and stuff like that. So that's the end of this video, guys. I'm going to wrap it up. So those were the main differences in regards to working hours, shift patterns, and also part-time and full-time positions between Canada and the UK. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And leave me a comment down below if you guys what your shifts were like, essentially. How were your hours? Did you work 8-hour shifts? Did you work 12-hour shifts? Because I know some parts of Canada and the UK also allow you to work shorter and longer shifts as well. So let me know. I'll see you guys next time.